The rose garden was unusually quiet that morning. A light spring breeze stirred the American flag that stood tall beside the press podium, and yet the atmosphere felt electric, tense, like the calm before a storm. Vice President J.D. Vance, now in his second year serving under President Donald Trump's historic second term, had called a press conference to discuss the administration's sweeping new family policy reform. But the journalists weren't here for the policies. They wanted blood. And one reporter in particular, Clara Hensley of The Nation Today, a well-known progressive outlet, had a different agenda. J.D. Vance stood at the podium, his demeanor composed, shoulders back, face calm but steeled. The press knew him as the man who'd risen from a rough Rust Belt upbringing to Yale Law and the Senate, now occupying the vice presidency. He was a devout Christian, a former Marine, and perhaps most importantly to his critics, married to Usha Vance, a brilliant attorney of Indian descent. To some, she represented strength and resilience. To others in the liberal media, she was a target of suspicion tied into a broader narrative of identity politics. The first half of the press briefing went smoothly. J.D. outlined the administration's new tax credits for working families, school choice funding increases, and a controversial proposal for parental leave restructured as tax relief rather than cash benefits. Then came Clara. Clara Hensley had made a name for herself by asking sharp, combative questions. Some praised her courage, others called her questions thinly veiled activism. But today, she didn't come to ask about child tax credits. She came to wage war. Vice President Vance, she began, standing tall with her microphone raised, you talk about family values, American heritage, and patriotism. But how do you reconcile those ideals with your wife's past legal work representing multinational corporations accused of human rights abuses abroad? Doesn't that compromise your message? A hush fell over the crowd. J.D.'s jaw tightened ever so slightly. I'm here to talk about policy, he said firmly. But I will say this, my wife is a proud American who has dedicated her life to the law, to justice, and to her family. Her private legal work, well before I took office, has no bearing on this administration's commitment to the American people. Clara pressed on, eyes gleaming with the hint of a fight. With all due respect, Mr. Vice President, transparency matters. Your wife's work, her origins, and her faith, these all shape the decisions you make. Isn't it fair to say that the American people deserve to know more about her influence on your political life? J.D. paused. He looked around the press corps, then back at Clara. The silence was loud. Reporters shifted uncomfortably. The camera lights burned brighter. He leaned slightly into the microphone. Are you suggesting that because my wife is Indian American and a woman of faith, she has some foreign or improper influence on me? Clara stammered, No, I didn't say that, Aya. That's exactly what you're implying, J.D. continued, voice rising just a notch. Let me be very clear. Usha Vance is not a prop. She is not a political pawn. And she sure as hell isn't obligated to have her private life dissected because you want to score ideological points. The reporters were frozen. J.D. was just warming up. You say you're fighting for transparency. But I see through this isn't journalism. It's targeted harassment dressed up as concern. The American people didn't elect my wife. They elected me. If you want to debate policy, I'm here for it. But if you're going to attack the character of a woman who has stayed out of the spotlight, who has raised our children, supported our military families, and asked for nothing in return, then you're not a reporter. You're a political operative with a press pass. Clara's face turned red, but J.D. wasn't done. You want to talk about family? Mine is off limits. Period. The press room was silent. And then J.D. Vance stepped away from the podium, not retreating, but roaring in calm defiance. The press conference video went viral within hours. Clips of J.D. Vance's confrontation with Clara Hensley flooded social media, each one edited with a different flavor depending on the platform. On right-wing channels, J.D. was hailed as a defender of family values, a true statesman, and even the lion of the new right. On progressive sites, the narrative was very different. Accusations of misogyny, deflection, and what they called a Trumpian meltdown peppered headlines. But J.D. Vance didn't flinch. In the West Wing of the White House, the mood was focused but tense. Chief of Staff Mark Meadows walked beside J.D. through the marble corridors, their shoes echoing in the silence. You rattled the media cage, J.D. Mark said, giving a sideways glance. Clara's already on MSNBC accusing you of xenophobia, patriarchal gaslighting, and wait for it, weaponizing dignity. Whatever that means. J.D. smirked. Let them talk. The American people saw it with their own eyes. They know what's real. Meadows nodded. The base is fired up. President Trump called from Mar-a-Lago. He loved it. Said you showed fight with finesse. JD appreciated the support, but he wasn't after applause. He was after something deeper, restoring truth to the national conversation. Later that evening, he and Usha sat on their back porch in the Naval Observatory residence, the city skyline faint behind the trees. Their kids were asleep and the night carried a peaceful hum. But the topic on both their minds loomed heavy. "I never wanted to become the story," Usha said quietly, wrapping her cardigan tighter. "You're not the story. They're trying to make you one," JD replied, gently taking her hand. "But I won't let them." Usha looked up, her eyes steady. "I've been a lawyer long enough to know how narratives work. They're trying to paint me as some shadowy influencer because I'm not white, because I have a brain, and because I married someone they can't control." JD gave a small, proud grin. "Exactly," she continued. "This isn't about me. It's about silencing families like ours, faithful, mixed, traditional but modern. It threatens their narrative that only one type of diversity matters." JD nodded. "That's why I had to push back. Not just for us, but for every family being told they don't fit the script." The next morning, JD returned to the podium, not with fire, but with facts. He opened with a statement. "I want to speak directly to the American people today. Because while the media obsesses over my wife's resume, my children's skin tone, and our marriage, Americans are wondering why groceries cost more, why the border is open, and why their kids are being taught that gender is a costume." He continued, undeterred. "My wife's background is not a scandal. It's the American dream. Her parents immigrated legally, worked hard, and raised a daughter who earned degrees from Yale and worked to defend the Constitution. If that offends you, the problem isn't with us. The problem is with your values." This time, the press didn't interrupt. JD's tone was even measured, commanding respect. He concluded, "If you want to ask questions about the economy, education, or our foreign policy, I'm all ears. But if you think you can score political points by attacking a woman who chooses to serve her country quietly, then you're going to find out just how loud I can be." Applause actually broke out among a few reporters, something unheard of in this climate. And just like that, JD Vance changed the rules of engagement. He didn't run from the smear campaign. He torched it. By midweek, the culture war had reached a fever pitch. Cable news was a battleground. On CNN, talking heads questioned whether JD Vance had overstepped, branding his remarks an attack on the free press. Over at MSNBC, Clara Hensley was given a full segment to explain herself. "I was simply doing my job," she told Rachel Maddow, looking directly into the camera with teary eyes. "This wasn't personal. The vice president is trying to silence questions that matter. The American people deserve to know who's influencing our elected officials." But her attempt to frame herself as a victim wasn't landing like it used to. Over on Fox News, Tucker Carlson ran a blistering 15-minute monologue titled, "They Came After His Wife," and JD Vance didn't flinch. He played the now-famous clip in slow motion. JD Vance, calm but fiery, standing tall as he called out what he labeled as ideological bullying under the mask of journalism. "Here's what they don't get," Tucker said. JD's wife didn't run for office. She isn't making policy. But she is a threat to the narrative because she breaks their mold, an immigrant's daughter who didn't become a woke activist, but a wife, a mother, a believer in American values. In Ohio, JD's home state, working-class families tuned in as the media frenzy unfolded. Diner talk and factory lunch breaks turned into passionate defenses of the vice president. "Hell, they hate him because he married a strong woman who loves this country. That's it," said Carl Jennings, a steelworker in Youngstown. "They don't know what to do when someone don't fit their boxes." In Indiana, a mother of three named Alyssa posted a video that went viral. "As a military wife, I just want to say thank you to JD Vance. For once, someone in Washington told the press to back off our families." Even some traditional liberals were growing uncomfortable with the spectacle. An op-ed in The Atlantic, titled "When Political Attacks Go Too Far," questioned Clara's line of inquiry and warned against turning family members into fair game. But while America debated, the political class bristled. Senator Chuck Schumer released a veiled statement condemning attacks on a free and open press while simultaneously accusing the Trump administration of promoting dangerous rhetoric. Privately, Democratic operatives were worried. JD Vance was becoming a problem not because he made mistakes, but because he didn't. He was articulate, authentic, and worst of all, popular. The Trump-Vance administration had weathered a brutal post-COVID economy and shifting global threats. But JD had emerged as a voice of the people. And now, by defending his wife with dignity and strength, he was rallying the very voters Democrats had long claimed to champion. In the White House Situation Room, President Trump chuckled as he rewatched the confrontation. "That's how it's done," he said to advisors. "No backing down. No apologies. That's America first." Meanwhile, JD was preparing for a town hall in Des Moines. He refused to hide behind press secretaries or polished statements. Instead, he stood in front of everyday Iowans in a high school gym, sleeves rolled up, no teleprompter. "This week they tried to turn my marriage into a scandal," he said, pacing the stage slowly. "They dug through my wife's life because they couldn't beat our ideas. But I'm here to tell you, I won't be intimidated. And I won't stop fighting for families like yours." The crowd erupted in cheers. A teenage girl in the front row held up a handmade sign that read, "My dad said you're the only politician he trusts." "I agree." JD smiled and pointed. "Smart dad." The moment, like everything he'd done that week, wasn't scripted. And that's what made it so dangerous to his opponents. The desperation in DC was palpable. Behind closed doors, top media consultants and liberal think tanks were holding late-night Zoom calls. Clara Hensley's confrontation with JD Vance had not only backfired, it had sparked a populist wildfire. And no one in their camp had a fire hose big enough to put it out. "He's bulletproof with the working class," said a strategist from a left-leaning pack. "We try to paint him as extreme, and he turns it into a sermon for common sense." So the game plan changed. If they couldn't smear JD directly, they'd try a classic Washington maneuver. Dig up dirt on Usha. Within 48 hours, headlines began to sprout across the internet. Vice President's wife worked for corporate law firm with global ties. Who is Usha Vance really? Inside the private life of a public mystery. Analysis. Could Usha Vance's faith and culture influence U.S. policy? The last one drew the most outrage. Faith and culture? It didn't take long before even moderate Americans saw the pattern. The mainstream media was going after a woman of Indian heritage, deeply religious and private, for the crime of being married to a conservative. The backlash was immediate. On The View, Alyssa Farah Griffin, a former White House aide turned centrist commentator, delivered a surprising rebuke to her co-hosts. "I'm sorry, but what exactly are we doing here?" she said live on air. "We claim to champion women of color, women in STEM, women in law, but when one doesn't agree with our politics, we try to tear her down. That's hypocrisy." Usha Vance is a brilliant, accomplished woman who has never asked to be in the spotlight. Conservative commentators doubled down. "She's the anti-Kamala," declared Jesse Waters. "She doesn't need the cameras. She doesn't need to scream about justice. She just lives it." At home, Usha watched it all unfold with a mix of disbelief and calm defiance. "I knew marrying you wouldn't be easy," she told JD one night, as they sat together reviewing briefing notes for the upcoming Midwest Jobs Summit. "Yeah, but I was hoping you'd at least get a break now and then," he said, half smiling. She leaned back, eyes calm. "Don't worry about me. They can't define me, and they can't reach me." JD admired her strength. The same quiet resilience that had carried her through law school, clerkships, pregnancies, and now, political firestorms. She never needed to be loud to be powerful. The next day, JD did something unexpected. He invited Clara Hensley to a one-on-one interview on live TV. It was a gutsy move, but classic JD. Face the storm head-on. The interview was broadcast on C-SPAN and picked up by major networks. Clara sat across from him, visibly uneasy. This wasn't her turf anymore. JD opened with civility. "Clara, I appreciate you being here. I want to give you the chance to ask any question without the shouting, without the press pool chaos. Just us." She tried again. "Mr. Vice President, don't you believe the American people deserve transparency when it comes to your wife's background and influence?" JD nodded. "They do. And here's what they should know. Usha is my partner, not my handler. She advises me as any good spouse does. But if you think she's pulling strings in the West Wing, you clearly don't know either of us." Then he did something that went viral within minutes. He pulled out a copy of the Federalist Papers, handed it to Clara, and said, "This is how we govern. Not through gossip columns. Not through spouses. Not through smear campaigns. Through ideas. Through debate. Through the Constitution. Clara blinked, clearly caught off guard. He leaned in. You want to debate immigration? Let's go. Education reform? I'm ready. But if the only thing you have in your toolbox is attacking my family, then maybe you're not a journalist, you're just a brand. And just like that, J.D. Vance redefined the rules again. The interview clip hit social media like a thunderclap. By morning, the hashtags #JDVance2028 and #HandsOffUsha were trending across X, formerly Twitter, Truth Social, and even Instagram. Thousands of Americans, Republican, Independent, and even a few disenchanted Democrats rallied around the idea that enough was enough. Smearing families was no longer politics. It was cowardice. Even Elon Musk reposted the clip with a single caption. This is what leadership looks like. Meanwhile, at the White House, President Donald Trump was pacing across the Oval Office carpet, giddy with energy. He's better than I was at this, Trump said with a proud grin, sipping a Diet Coke. He hits hard, but clean. Media's gonna be spinning for weeks. Vance is the real deal. JD, however, wasn't celebrating. He had work to do. At the Midwest Jobs Summit in Missouri, he delivered a rousing address, not about politics or personalities, but about opportunity. The theme of his speech was dignity through work. In it, he proposed a bold initiative that would expand trade schools, incentivize domestic manufacturing, and reduce student debt for blue-collar families. The response was electric. But the real heart of his message came in a quieter moment. I want to tell you about my wife, he said to the packed arena. She didn't grow up in luxury. She didn't demand attention. But she worked hard. She believed in the promise of this country. And now, people want to tear her down, not because of anything she did, but because of who she married and how she lives. He paused. But we don't back down when things get hard. We rise. Because this nation was built not by cynics, but by families who endure. The crowd stood to their feet in a thunderous ovation that lasted nearly a full minute. Later, a journalist from a smaller, local outlet approached J.D. Mr. Vice President, what do you say to the media class who believes you've gone too far, who say that defending your wife so publicly distracts from your official duties? J.D. responded without hesitation. I say this, if defending my family is a distraction, then maybe our leaders forgot what real priorities are. Because the moment you won't stand up for the people you love, how can you be trusted to stand up for anyone else? He turned and walked off, leaving the reporter stunned and speechless. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was staggering. Clara Hensley announced she was taking time off to reflect and was quietly pulled from the White House beat. A bipartisan group of senators issued a rare statement condemning the trend of personal targeting in political journalism. But most importantly, something had changed in the public psyche. J.D. Vance had drawn a line, and millions of Americans agreed with where he drew it. Usha, for her part, returned to her quiet role with grace. She issued no statement, gave no interview. But her silence became its own form of defiance, a symbol of the strength behind the scenes. As 2028 loomed on the horizon, whispers turned to conversations, and conversations turned into strategy meetings. Could J.D. Vance be the next standard-bearer for the America First movement? Could he lead a new generation that honored tradition and progress, that defended family without fear, and who understood that strength didn't require arrogance, but resolve? Only time would tell. But one thing was clear. When the media tried to destroy J.D. Vance through his wife, they didn't break him. They built him. And in that battle, the vice president didn't just defend his family, he redefined leadership for a new America.